Okay, so in the previous video I showed you how to install Gatsby and create a basic empty site. And in this one we're going to take that a stage further, and I'm going to talk about the site structure itself. So just to briefly recap, in the previous video I explained that to create a new site you just basically have to use the Gatsby command and you just give it a name. So I'm going to use the default template here, so I'm just going to give it the name Gatsby test. Actually, I'd call it Gatsby tutorial site, and then let that run. And what it's going to do now is it's going to clone down the repositories for Gatsby and everything that it needs to get started. So while that's doing that for a second, let's talk about what we're going to do in this video. In this video, I'm going to run through the files that you will see on a very bare bones basic Gatsby site and how we're going to use those to start building out our site and some of the features that we want to include. And I think that it's important, there's lots of really good starter templates out there for Gatsby for creating blogs and product sites and those kind of things. But I think it's important when you're learning something new like this that you only really see the code that you need to use and understand, and not all the other code that's wrapped around it. So that's why I've chosen to go with a bare bones site here. So let's go ahead now that it's finished and change to that site folder, and I'm just going to do a listing. You can see the files here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my web browser here, and we're just going to do as we did in the previous one. We're going to run the Gatsby development server. I'm just going to say Gatsby develop, and that's going to let me load this up in my local web browser here from my machine. So we'll just give that a second. Okay, it's ready to go. And so as we learned from the command line down there, we go to 8000, port 8000 on localhost, and here's the site being served up. Very basic, okay? Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to open up those files in my editor here. Okay, and let's just move that off to the side. Right, here we go. So now we've got this site up and running. Let's look at the files here, okay? So we have the root folder here, and inside here are some folders that, files that we don't really need to concern ourselves with too much. For example, .cache, we don't need to worry about that. If you're familiar with any kind of node development, node apps, or using NPM, anything like that, this node modules is probably going to be familiar to you. And what it is, we don't really need to worry about it too much, but any of the node modules that we install or Gatsby plugins, those kind of things, they're all going to be put into this node modules folder. And we don't need to maintain this directly because we're going to use this package Json file to do that. That's the standard way of doing things. Next up, we have this public folder, and inside the public folder is the files that you would push out to the server, right? It's the rendered up, compiled, created site, or however you want to term it, the files that Gatsby is going to create for you. And those files are created by all the source files which exist in this src folder. And in here we have 3 other folders right now, some very basic setup. Different sites and different templates, you'll see these laid out in different ways for different things, but this is a good one to give you an example of how Gatsby works and builds its site. I'm just going to expand all these and we'll go through them one by one. So if you're familiar with React at all, Gatsby is built on top of React, and React uses these things called components. And what they are, notice first of all, these are all JavaScript files, okay? And what a component is, it's basically a little structured piece of code, an object if you like. Think about it as something on the screen maybe that is pre-built. You pre-build it in these, so you don't need to rewrite the code every time, and then you just include that component in your layout. So for example, if we go to, I'm just going to click on the link to go to page 2 here, we have this header area, right? And this header area is this component here, okay? So this component contains everything it needs to build that header section. And don't worry about the details right now, we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so right now we have a header, an image component, we have the layout CSS file, we have a layout.js, and an SEO. The layout and the SEO, you don't really need to mess with those too much. I've never had cause to touch them. They're kind of a base, the SEO gives you all the details for the search engines and puts that in your headers for your files and that kind of thing. And you can certainly tweak these if you have a need. And layout is kind of a basic container that includes some stuff in here for you as well. Okay, so you can use those. Now let's just go down to the next one. Images is pretty self-explanatory. There's a couple of image files in there, right? If I go back to the home page, you can see those images. So that image is being used in this image component, okay? And then finally, we have this pages folder, which is where we create our site level pages, which is, think of it as a page as being a big component, right? This is the pages that get rendered out by Gatsby. So for example, the index file is it's this index site here, right? And then if I click the link here to go to page 2, it's loading up this page 2 here, okay? And then we have a 404. Now a 404, for those of you that may not be familiar, this is the page that a browser delivers when it cannot find the address you're looking for. So for example, if I put in, say, layout 8000 / about, there is no page called about right now, right? Because you can see under this pages, there's nothing here called about, okay? So it can't find this address on the site. And so what it does, when you're doing development work with Gatsby, it gives you this helpful development version of the 404 page, where it lists basically the site structure for you to try and find what you're looking for, okay? This is not what the user sees. A normal user, when they go to your website, will see the 404 page that's generated here, okay? And you can preview that just by clicking this button. So this is the one that the user would actually see. So this is a good example page here, a very simple page that we can use to talk about how a page is constructed in Gatsby. So a page in Gatsby works like this. Now, if you're familiar with sort of the old school way of doing web pages or other web apps, you'll be familiar with the fact that JavaScript gets included in an HTML page. With Gatsby and React, it actually works the other way around. Your HTML is basically included in the JavaScript, okay? So each of these files is a JavaScript file. And if we look at this 404 JavaScript, you're going to see that there's some things you'll see as a running theme across all the files. So in this case, for example, again, Gatsby's built on top of React, so we have to do this import React. We're importing the React libraries and files here. We're also including these two components from up here that we mentioned, the layout and SEO. Those are being imported here. And basically the way this works is it's saying import this thing that I'm going to give the name layout, which is this file, okay? So in here we refer to it as layout. So moving on down, we have this JavaScript variable called notfoundPage. And what that does is this function within the variable returns all of this here for us, right? It's a mixture of HTML and JavaScript. And then at the very end here, we export this as not found page, okay? And that's what makes this available to Gatsby as a page. Now, you'll notice in here, so for example, SEO here, instead of having you've got these HTML tags, H1, P1, that should be familiar to you. We also have these self-generated ones, this layout and this SEO, and we can use them because we created them up here with these components, right? So we have everything wrapped inside the layout. All of this here is wrapped inside the layout component from over here. And then the SEO one at the top here, right? This SEO component expects a name for the title, or a string, I should say, for the title, which in this case is 404 not found. And if you look over here in the web browser, sure enough, 404 not found. That's where that's coming from, okay? So I hope that makes sense. It'll if it doesn't make sense right now, don't worry, it will. This is a very regular pattern, and you'll get used to it, okay? So that's basically the page, a very simple breakdown structure of a very simple page there. Let's go to the page 2 one. You'll notice it's the same thing, right? We're importing React. In this case, we're also importing this feature of Gatsby called link, and we're using it down here. So if you think of web development where you have like href equals http something, right? That's what this is. Instead of doing that, we're using this link tag here, and because of the way it works and the way it's built, it expects us to give it some options. So one of those parameters, I should say, we should really call it, is to say where does it go to. Well, it's going to link to, right, in this case, the home page. So let's go to this page too, right? So it also has some text. Go back to home page. You can see it right here. And notice down in the bottom of the browser window, the link that it's showing is localhost 8000. And so that's what it's doing. It's saying link back to the root of the site. Okay. But other than that, we've got some HTML, we've got this SEO, component. So this is a trend you're going to see, and we'll be doing a lot of this as we build out our pages. So everything again gets wrapped into this second page function variable that gets returned and is exported here as this second page. So this is a very familiar pattern that you will see. Now again, if you use different templates and different starting kits for Gatsby, all these files over here, they may be laid out differently and have different folder names, but the principle is the same. It works the same, right? You have these components, and then you have folders of resources that you're going to consume, and then at some point you're going to have pages that you're going to create. And these pages are where all of this stuff up here gets wrapped into the page, and Gatsby then turns these pages into the pages themselves, just like we see over here, right? Localhost 8000/page-2 is the same name, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. This is the very basic structure for a Gatsby site, okay? We're going to go down here just quickly. I just want to go back and talk about one of these files down here, this package.json. In fact, let's just go through these very quickly. So you can see a lot of these other ones we will be using and we will be covering them, but right now they only have comments in them. All right, the Gatsby Config is where you put in the name, the title, and the description and the author for the website, and you list all of the Gatsby plugins. Now, this can be a simple or involved process depending on the plugin, and we'll cover a lot of this. Gatsby has an enormous library of plugins that are super useful. And what you do is you list that plugin here once you've installed it using Node or NPM or whatever your package manager of choice is. You then list it in the plugins so that Gatsby knows to include it, and it may or may not have a bunch of options like this one does here for the images. Okay, so that's what that is. We've got this Node one that is empty right now. Again, we'll cover these in the future when we come to use them. And then going down here, this package.json, this is listing the dependencies for this particular site, okay? And you can see by default it fills in a lot of things for us. We've got the Gatsby in here, we've got React and some various Gatsby plugins and various details. You can edit this by hand if you want to, but we really don't need to, because when we install a plugin or remove one or anything like that using the terminal, it should put it in this package.json file for us and keep this maintained. Sometimes it goes wrong, but for the most part it should take care of it all for us. Okay, so that's what these remaining files are. But this package.json one is important because when you download a site, right, a starting profile or whatever it may be, your site from the repository, something like that, you're going to do an npm install. You're going to tell it to Node to install these packages. And then when it installs these packages, it's going to use this list as the reference, right? So you don't store all these plugins and Gatsby and everything in your files for your site because we don't need them. We just need to know where to get them on the internet, and that's what this file is listing here. It's telling us, let's take one for example. Go get the Gatsby, files, this version or better. That's what that's doing there. So as long as they're listed in here, it means that anyone can recreate your site, or even you can recreate your site on multiple machines or whatever whatever you need to every time, and they'll always be the same as long as they're listed and this package.json file is maintained, which, like I say, is pretty straightforward, and we'll get into that. But basically that's the folder structure and file structure for a very simple default Gatsby site. I hope this video has been useful. If you didn't watch the first part, go and see the first part. I'll list it in the show notes. Next time around we'll move further into details. We'll start creating our own pages and components and start looking at some of that stuff and taking it from there.